Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pules. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. The palace was full of noise and worry. The youngest prince, Samuel, had been crying since the morning. His voice echoed through the high marble halls, sharp and restless. No matter who tried to help, nothing worked. Servants rushed with bottles, blankets, and toys, but the child's cries only grew louder. The queen, Margaret, stood near the grand window, her hands tight around the edges of her robe. She had important guests arriving from the Galactic Council in less than an hour, but the endless crying made it hard to think. Princess Elena, the elder sister of the prince, sat near his cradle. She tried rocking him in her arms, whispering to him, giving him his favorite carved wooden horse, but Samuel only twisted and cried harder. His face was red and his tiny fists opened and closed in distress. Elena felt helpless. She loved her brother deeply, but no matter what she did, she could not calm him. The palace healer came and checked the baby's health. The healer spoke gently to the queen, saying there was no sickness, no pain, only some unknown discomfort that made him restless. But this answer brought no peace. The queen turned to her chief attendant and ordered that the noise must stop before the guests arrived. Yet no one had any new idea. Outside the palace gates, Captain Ethan Brooks was arriving with his security team. He had been sent from Earth as part of the diplomatic escort to protect the royal family during the meeting. Ethan had seen many strange events in his years of service, but nothing quite like what he was about to walk into. As he stepped into the main hall, the sound of the crying reached him, strong and steady, like an alarm that would not stop. He walked past the guards and into the royal chamber. The sight before him was unlike the formal scenes he had expected. The queen looked tired and tense. The princess looked worried, and the baby's cries filled every corner of the room. Court members stood around, whispering to each other, unsure of what to do. Ethan paused for a moment. He noticed something strange in the way the room felt. The air seemed heavy, as if the constant movement and noise of so many people was pressing in on the child. The sound of the baby's cries bounced off the stone walls, creating a restless echo. He saw the princess glance toward him. Her eyes held both hope and doubt. She did not know him, but she seemed to be asking with her look if he might try something different. Ethan walked closer to the cradle. The queen turned to him with a question in her eyes, and he bowed slightly before speaking. He asked if he could try to help. The queen looked uncertain. This was her youngest child, and she did not hand him to strangers. But the princess stepped forward and said softly that maybe it was worth trying, since nothing else had worked. For a moment, the queen said nothing. Then, with a small nod, she allowed Ethan to come closer. The guard stepped aside. Ethan slowly reached down and lifted Samuel from the cradle. The baby's face was red and damp from crying. Ethan shifted him into his arms and held him close, moving with slow, steady steps. The noise in the room faded as the court watched in silence. The soldier looked down at the child and spoke in a low voice, the kind used for comfort, not commands. He began to hum a simple tune from his home, a melody his sister had once sung to her own child. The sound was gentle but sure, each note even and calm. The baby's cries started to slow. His small fists loosened, and his breathing steadied. After a minute, his head rested against Ethan's chest. The room stayed silent, as if no one wanted to break the spell. The queen's shoulders relaxed just a little. The princess stood still, her eyes fixed on her brother and the man holding him. For the first time that day, she felt a small rise of hope. Outside, the bells of the palace signaled the arrival of the guests, but inside the chamber, there was a new kind of quiet. It was not the tense silence from before. It was the peace of a baby finally asleep. Ethan looked up and met the princess's gaze. She gave a faint smile, one that spoke of relief and gratitude. The moment was brief, but it stayed with her, and she knew this was the beginning of something she could not yet name. The sound of the palace bells faded as the large doors of the chamber opened. The royal guards moved quickly to welcome the guests from the council. Queen Margaret straightened her robe and gave a final look toward her son. Samuel was still sleeping in Captain Ethan Brooks' arms, his small breaths soft and even. The queen had not seen him this calm all day. The council members entered with slow, measured steps. They were dressed in long, dark cloaks, their faces showing the seriousness of the meeting ahead. The queen greeted them with a polite nod, but her eyes kept drifting toward her youngest child. The Princess Alina stood beside her mother, trying to appear calm, though she kept glancing at the soldier who had done what no one else could. Ethan stepped back a little, allowing the Queen to take her place before the guests. He stayed near the wall, holding Samuel carefully, knowing that the wrong movement might wake the child. The court attendants whispered to each other, still amazed by what had just happened. They had seen the strongest warriors in the Queen's service, but none had ever thought that one could calm a child so easily. When the formal greetings ended, the Queen motioned for her attendants to take Samuel to the royal nursery. She looked at Ethan for a moment, then gave a slight nod, a silent thanks. Ethan handed the sleeping child to the attendant, moving with care so the baby would not stir. The moment Samuel was gone from his arms, the soldier felt the weight of the palace's eyes on him. The Queen invited the council members to follow her to the grand meeting hall. As the group walked, Alina slowed her steps until she was beside Ethan. She spoke quietly so that only he could hear. She told him she had never seen her brother rest so quickly. She asked how he had known what to do. Ethan answered in a calm voice. He told her that during his years of service, he had been sent to many places where families had lost their homes. In those places, children cried not just from hunger or pain but from fear and the noise around them. He learned that sometimes the best way to help was not to speak too much or act too fast. It was to give them steady movement, a familiar sound, and a sense of safety. Alina listened closely, her eyes thoughtful. She had grown up surrounded by royal traditions, where problems were solved with rules, orders, and the work of many people. She realized that sometimes it took just one person's quiet action to make the biggest change. As they reached the meeting hall, Ethan moved to stand near the entrance, ready to serve as guard. The Queen took her seat at the head of the long table, with the council members on either side. The discussion began, voices rising and falling in careful tones. Ethan kept his focus on the room, watching for any sign of trouble. From time to time, Alina looked toward the door where Ethan stood. She thought about the way he had stepped forward in the chamber without hesitation, not because it was his duty as a soldier, but because he had seen someone in need. That kind of action was rare in the court, where most people waited for orders before acting. After hours of talks, the meeting ended. The Queen dismissed the council members with formal words, and the guests left the hall. The air in the palace felt lighter, though the day's events still weighed on everyone's mind. Later, as the sun set over the palace gardens, Alina found Ethan near the courtyard. He was speaking to a few guards, but when he saw her, he stepped aside. She told him that her mother wished to thank him properly at the evening banquet. Ethan bowed slightly, saying it was not necessary, but he would attend. Before leaving, Alina paused and looked at him closely. She said that she believed his arrival at the palace had come at just the right moment. There was something in her voice that made Ethan think she was speaking about more than the crying baby. When she walked away, Ethan stood in the quiet courtyard, the sound of the fountain nearby. He thought about the small boy he had held and the calm that had come over the room. In all his years of guarding borders and escorting leaders, he had never expected that the most important act of his day would be to help a child find sleep. Yet in a way, it felt like the most important mission he had ever completed. The banquet hall glowed with warm light from the tall chandeliers. Long tables were lined with silver dishes, golden cups, and plates filled with fresh bread, roasted meats, and fruits from the royal gardens. Musicians played softly in one corner, their tunes drifting through the air like gentle waves. The Queen sat at the head table, her posture graceful and calm. Princess Alina sat beside her, dressed in a gown of deep blue silk. Captain Ethan Brooks entered quietly, dressed not in armor, but in the formal uniform of his rank. His steps were measured, his eyes scanning the room with the habit of a soldier. The Queen noticed him and gave a small gesture, inviting him to approach. When he reached her side, she spoke in a clear voice so that nearby guests could hear. She thanked him for his help earlier in the day, saying that the peace he brought to her son had made the council meeting possible. Her words carried weight, and those at the table nodded in agreement. Ethan bowed and said he had only done what anyone should do when they see a child in distress. His tone was steady, not proud, but his words drew quiet respect from the guests. The Queen then offered him a seat at the royal table, an honor rarely given to someone outside the family. As the banquet went on, Alina spoke with Ethan. She asked more about his travels and the places he had served. He told her about distant colonies, small towns rebuilt after storms, and long nights guarding roads through quiet forests. He spoke of times when battles seemed certain, only for peace to be reached at the last moment. Alina listened closely, asking questions, wanting to know not just the events, but what he had learned from them. Halfway through the meal, a servant rushed in and whispered something to the queen. Her face tightened slightly, though she did not rise from her seat. She turned to Alina and asked her to take Ethan to the nursery to check on Samuel. The queen explained that the baby had woken, and the nurse could not get him back to sleep. Alina stood at once and led Ethan through the side halls toward the nursery. The palace was quieter now, the music of the banquet fading behind them. When they reached the room, they found Samuel in his crib, his face flushed and his voice loud as he cried. The nurse looked tired and frustrated, unsure what more she could try. Ethan stepped forward without hesitation. He picked Samuel up, holding him close just as he had earlier that day. This time, Alina watched more carefully. She saw how Ethan's movements were slow and even how his voice stayed low, how his hands supported the child in a way that made him feel secure. Ethan began to hum the same tune as before. Within minutes, Samuel's cries faded, and his small head rested against the soldier's chest. Alina stepped closer, speaking in a quiet tone so as not to disturb the baby. She said she had never seen anything like it. Ethan replied that calming a child was less about skill and more about patience, that children could sense fear or worry in those around them. If the person holding them was steady, the child often became steady too. They stood in the nursery for a while, the soft sound of breathing filling the room. The nurse thanked Ethan and took Samuel gently from his arms, placing him back in the crib. The baby stayed asleep this time. On the walk back to the banquet, Alina asked Ethan why he had chosen to serve as a soldier, when he clearly had the heart of a caretaker. Ethan answered that service meant more than guarding walls or fighting battles. It meant protecting life in all its forms, whether that life was a city, a home, or a single child. When they returned, the banquet was still lively, though the queen noticed their arrival and the calm look on Elena's face. She guessed without asking that her son was once again resting peacefully. As the night ended, Ethan prepared to leave the hall, but before he could, Alina stopped him. She told him she believed his presence in the palace was more than a simple duty. She said that some people came into one's life for a reason, and she thought perhaps he was one of them. Ethan did not answer right away, but he gave a small nod. As he left the hall, he felt the weight of her words, unsure of where they might lead, but knowing the truth in them was real. The next morning, the palace was quiet except for the sound of footsteps in the long corridors. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, filling the marble floors with golden light. Princess Alina walked toward the gardens, her mind still thinking about the events of the past day. She found Ethan already there, standing near the fountain. He was watching the guards train in the courtyard, his posture straight but relaxed. Lena greeted him and asked if he had rested well. Ethan replied that soldiers slept anywhere they could, and a quiet room in the palace was a rare comfort. She smiled at his answer, then told him her mother wished to see him after the morning meal. He nodded, curious but silent. They walked together through the garden paths. Birds sang from the trees, and the air carried the smell of fresh flowers. Alina asked Ethan more about his past, and he told her about the years he spent traveling between worlds, serving as a protector for diplomats and settlers. He explained how he had seen both kindness and cruelty in equal measure, and how small acts of care often made the biggest difference in hard times. When they returned to the palace, the queen was waiting in the audience chamber. She greeted Ethan and thanked him again for helping her son. She then spoke of her concern for the safety of the royal family during the upcoming trade talks. She had heard of unrest in nearby regions, and she wanted someone she could trust close to her children. She asked Ethan if he would agree to stay at the palace until the talks were over. Ethan accepted without hesitation, said it was his duty to serve when called, and that protecting the family was an honor. The queen seemed relieved and gave instructions for him to be given full access to the palace grounds. The day passed with the usual work of the court. Messages arrived from distant territories, merchants came to speak with the queen, and servants moved through the halls carrying trays and documents. Ethan spent most of his time observing the guards and learning the layout of the palace. He noticed details others missed, a loose hinge on a side gate, a cracked stone step that could trip someone, a corner where shadows stayed too long. In the afternoon, Alina found him again near the nursery. Samuel was awake and restless, but not crying. The princess asked if Ethan would walk with them in the gardens to give the baby some fresh air. He agreed, and soon they were strolling along the sunny paths. Samuel looked around with wide eyes, reaching for the leaves and petals. Ethan carried him for part of the walk, speaking softly to him about the colors of the flowers and the sound of the water from the fountain. Alina watched the way her brother seemed calm in his presence. She told Ethan she believed Samuel trusted him already. Ethan replied that trust was earned through consistent care, and even a child could sense when someone meant no harm. As they returned to the palace, a guard approached with urgent news. A group of traders had been stopped outside the city gates, claiming they had a message for the queen, but refusing to give it to anyone else. The queen ordered Ethan to go with the guards to meet them. At the gates, Ethan found the traders waiting with uneasy expressions. One of them handed him a sealed letter saying it was from a distant ally. The letter warned of possible trouble during the trade talks, with some groups planning to cause disruption. Ethan read it carefully, then returned to the palace to report to the queen. The queen listened and thanked him for bringing the message quickly. She ordered extra guards for the coming days and told Ethan to stay close to her children. Alina stood beside her mother, listening to every word. She felt a small wave of relief knowing Ethan would be near. That evening, after the palace quieted down, Alina found Ethan on the terrace, looking out over the city. The lights below flickered like stars and the air was cool. She thanked him again for what he had done for Samuel, for the palace, and now for her mother's safety. He told her he was only doing his duty, but Alina shook her head and said that sometimes duty and care were the same thing. They stood in silence for a moment watching the city lights. Both aware that the days ahead might bring more than either of them expected. The morning of the trade talks arrived. The palace was alive with movement from the moment the sun rose. Servants hurried through the halls, guards checked every entrance, and the queen prepared to meet leaders from many lands. The memory of the warning letter was still fresh in everyone's mind, and Ethan stayed alert from the first hour of the day. Princess Elena helped her mother greet the first guests, while Samuel remained in the nursery under watch. Ethan stayed close to the royal family, his eyes scanning the hall, noting every face, every movement. The meeting began in the grand chamber, with long tables arranged in a circle. Merchants and council members spoke in calm voices at first, discussing routes, prices, and new agreements. But as the talks continued, Ethan noticed a man at the far end of the room shifting in his seat, his hand hidden beneath the table. Something in the man's posture felt wrong. Ethan moved slowly along the edge of the room, staying out of direct sight. When he reached the man's side, he saw a small device in his hand. Without drawing attention, Ethan placed a firm hand on the man's shoulder and spoke quietly, asking him to stand. The man hesitated, but the steady look in Ethan's eyes made him obey. 2 guards approached, and Ethan handed the device to them. It was a signal transmitter, likely meant to alert others outside the palace. The queen kept her focus on the meeting, but her eyes flicked toward Ethan in silent gratitude. The man was taken away without disrupting the talks. The rest of the day passed without further trouble. By evening, agreements were signed, and the leaders left the palace satisfied. The queen declared the talks a success, but she knew it might not have ended so well without Ethan's watchful presence. Later in the quiet of the gardens, Alina found Ethan sitting on a bench near the fountain. The water shimmered in the moonlight, and the air was cool. She told him she had heard about what happened in the meeting room, and thanked him again. Ethan said it was his job, but Alina reminded him that not everyone did their job with such care. As they spoke, a soft cry came from the corridor leading to the gardens. A nurse stepped out, holding Samuel, who had woken and was unsettled. Without needing to be asked, Ethan took the child into his arms. He began to walk slowly along the path, humming the same tune that had calmed the boy before. The sound of his voice mixed with the gentle splash of the fountain, and soon Samuel's head rested against his shoulder, his breathing even once more. Alina watched the scene with quiet amazement. She thought of the first time she had seen Ethan hold her brother and how that moment had changed her view of him. He was not only a soldier guarding the palace, he was someone who understood the value of peace in its smallest form. When Samuel was asleep again, Ethan handed him back to the nurse. Alina told him she believed he had done more for her family than he realized. It brought calm in times of unrest and trust in moments of doubt. The Queen joined them then, walking slowly along the garden path. She looked at Ethan and said that while his duty as a soldier might end when his orders were complete, he would always have a place in her court should he choose to stay. Ethan bowed and said he would consider her offer. The three of them stood together under the pale light of the moon. The palace behind them was quiet now, the halls no longer filled with urgent footsteps or worried voices. Samuel slept peacefully, the talks were secure, and the night carried only the sound of water and wind. Ethan knew he would soon return to his duties beyond the palace. But he also knew this place, these people, and this moment would stay with him. For Alina, the memory of a soldier calming her brother would remain as clear as the day it happened. And for the Queen, the knowledge that a single act of kindness could protect more than just a child would guide her in the days to come. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.